Welcome back to Words for the Journey, words of hope, love, and joy for the journey of faith, the journey of life. We're looking at, in this series of video presentations, the 10 most important passages in the Bible to understand who God is. So in response to those who say that God of the Bible is an awful God, he's a malevolent God, capricious, he's not a nice God, I'm looking at 10 passages that ground me and hopefully ground us in our understanding of who God is, and sometimes maybe surprise us. And so I'm looking now at the third chapter of the book of Genesis, early on in the Bible story, where it's a very pivotal chapter. God has said, don't eat from the one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of that tree, you're going to die, Adam and Eve. And they have lots of trees to eat from. They have a whole garden of trees, but they choose to eat from the one tree they're not supposed to eat from. And this plunges them and the whole creation into God's curse. But there's 3 or 4 things in this chapter that make me see God, even in that moment of sin and disobedience and rebellion, as a God who is gracious and loving. So the first thing that I see in this chapter, Genesis chapter 3, is that after Adam and Eve sin and eat from the tree they're not supposed to, God comes walking in the garden, and it says in Genesis 3 verse 9, God called out, "Where are you?" So he doesn't come, first of all, barking, you've done something wrong, how awful. He comes with invitation. And it intrigues me to think, what would have happened if Adam and Eve had said, here we are, we have done wrong. Please forgive us. I think the whole history of humankind would have been different. But they go into hiding, but God, even in their hiding, comes walking in the garden, and he asks, where are you? I'm inviting you to come out and meet with me. So he doesn't come, the text doesn't tell us he's angry or stomping around the garden. He comes looking for relationship, looking for connection. What happens next? Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent or the snake. God brings his curse or his judgments on the snake, on Adam and Eve, and on the earth. But even in the midst of judgments, God tells Adam and Eve that one day someone will come, and this is the first kind of promise of a Messiah. One day, someone's going to come to crush the head of this evil serpent, this evil force that has tempted them away from God. So I find that amazing, that even though there is judgment, yes, Adam and Eve they knew the consequence, and they brought this judgment of God on them because of what they did. Even in the midst of judgment, God brings good news. He brings, we might say, gospel hope. Then a third thing God does is, after this judgment, it says in the Bible, he clothes Adam and Eve. So they have taken fig leaves to clothe themselves and to hide themselves from each other and from God. And after God is about to cast them out of Eden, he makes clothing for them to cover them, which I find to be a gracious move on God's part. They need clothing as they are sent out of Eden. And as they need that clothing, it's provided to them by God himself. And then fourthly, and this, again, it might sound counterintuitive, but I think even the casting out of Eden is a kind of mercy. Because if they had stayed in Eden and they had eaten from the tree of life, they would have continued forever in this state of being in disobedience. They would not have had the chance of being forgiven or for God to do something redemptive in their lives. If they ate from the wrong tree, which they did, and if they had stayed in the garden and eaten from the tree of life to keep on living, they would have kept on going in that life of disobedience. And so in some ways, God's casting them out of Eden, this disobedience, because of their disobedience, that an act of casting them out, I think in some sense is judgment, but also is a mercy. Because as they're cast out, they do end their lives, death does come, but God is also able to bring something new, something redemptive, something of salvation through the rest of the story. So those are 3 or 4 things from Genesis 3. It looks like an awful chapter, and in many ways it is, but it's also, for me, a chapter that gives us another glimpse, maybe a surprising glimpse into who this God of the Bible is. Thanks for joining us for Words from the Journey.